So, when you hear the name George Orwell, your mind probably jumps straight to his incredible dystopian novels, right? 1984 or Animal Farm. But what was really going on behind the scenes? What was the engine that drove the man? Well, we're going to find out by diving right into Orwell's own essays to see what really made him tick.
And the key to understanding all this, it's right here, in this collection. We're going to focus on two of his absolute powerhouse essays, Why I Write and The Lion and the Unicorn. In these, he basically lays it all out. His own thinking, his motivations, and a pretty brutal diagnosis of the country he called home. So let's start with the big one. What got him writing in the first place?
All right, so let's tackle the fundamental question that really frames everything else. I mean, beyond just making a living or telling a good story, what did Orwell believe was the real point of it all? What was the ultimate purpose of putting pen to paper? And his answer? Wow, it shows you he wasn't just a writer, he was a man on a mission. Okay, so Orwell had this idea. He figured, take money out of the equation for a second. If you do that, every single writer is driven by a mix of four huge motives. And get this, he said these four things are constantly battling it out inside a writer's head. First up, and you gotta love how brutally honest he is about this, is just sheer egoism. It's that desire to seem smart, to have people talking about you, and maybe the biggest one, to leave a mark on the world that's still there after you're gone. He basically calls it nonsense to pretend this isn't a huge driver for anyone who's really determined. Then you've got number two, what he calls aesthetic enthusiasm. This is really about the pure love of the game, right? It's seeing beauty in the world, sure, but also in the words themselves, the feeling you get from a perfectly crafted sentence or the rhythm of a great story. It's the artist inside, wanting to share something beautiful that just can't be missed.
And third, there's this historical impulse. It's that deep down need to be a witness, the drive to see things as they actually are, to dig up the real facts and lock them down for the future. Basically, the writer's job is to record what's really going on.
And that brings us to the fourth, and for Orwell, maybe the most important one, political purpose. And listen, when he says political, he doesn't just mean elections and parties. He means it in the biggest sense possible. It's the desire to nudge the world in a certain direction, to change how people think about the kind of society they should be aiming for. He says no book is ever really free of this, that even claiming art has nothing to do with politics is, well, a political stance in itself.
So here's the thing. Orwell says that, left to his own devices, he probably would have been all about those first three motives: ego, art, history. But he wasn't exactly living in a peaceful time, was he? The absolute chaos of his era pretty much forced his hand and welded all his motivations into one single powerful purpose. And you can really see how his thinking evolved over time. It starts in Burma, where being a colonial cop showed him what imperialism really looked like up close. Then poverty hits him hard, and it just fuels his hatred of authority. But the absolute game changer, the moment he says turned the scale for him, that was fighting in the Spanish Civil War. And that experience, it just solidified everything. It gave him this incredibly clear, powerful mission statement. After Spain, his path was set. He declared that every serious thing he wrote from that point on was, in his words, against totalitarianism and for democratic socialism. So, what's so important to get here is that he wasn't just ditching art to write propaganda. No way. His goal was something way harder, way more ambitious. He wanted to fuse his politics and his art together. He wanted to make political writing into an art form. So now, armed with his new mission, Orwell turns that sharp eye of his back on his own home, England. In his essay, The Lion and the Unicorn, which he wrote while bombs were literally falling on London, he basically performs an autopsy on a country that's still alive, but in his mind, it's sick. Really, really sick. What he saw was a country that was just a walking paradox. On one hand, you have this incredibly gentle place, unarmed cops, polite bus conductors. But then you look a little closer and you see this unbelievable barbarity. Things like hanging judges and a massive, brutal empire that most people just try to ignore. So how did he sum all this up? He used this amazing metaphor. England is like family. A little stuffy, a bit dysfunctional, sure, but a family that sticks together when trouble comes. But here's the catch. It was a family with the wrong members in control. He was convinced that England was being run by this clueless, out-of-touch upper class that had no idea how to deal with a real threat like fascism. So, if the family's being run by the wrong people, what do you do? Well, for Orwell, the answer was radical. It wasn't enough to just fight the war. To actually win, England had to have a revolution from the inside out. It had to become a totally different country.
Here was his central point. The war was the ultimate stress test for an economic system. And in that test, he argued private capitalism was failing big time. Why? Because a system built on profit will always choose to make fancy cars and silk stockings if that's what makes money, even when the country desperately needs weapons to survive. It just wasn't working.
Okay, so what was his alternative? When Orwell says socialism, it's super important to know what he meant. He's not talking about some totalitarian nightmare. For him, it meant common ownership of resources, yeah, but with some massive guardrails, roughly equal incomes, real political democracy, and, this is key, getting rid of all class privilege for good.
And he draws this really sharp line between that and fascism. He saw fascism as this twisted version of a planned economy. It stole the efficiency part, but used it for the most horrific goal imaginable. Where socialism was about creating a world of equals, fascism was built on the exact opposite idea, that some people are just fundamentally better than others and have the right to conquer and enslave them.
So, his big plan, his English Revolution, what did that actually look like? Well, it boiled down to a few key things. First, you got to get the power away from the old and silly, as he put it. Second, you nationalize industry so you're focused on winning the war, not making profits. And third, and this is so important, you bring patriotism and intelligence together to unleash the real genius of the people. And this is where it all comes back together. How does this massive plan for a national revolution connect to something as small as writing one good sentence? For Orwell, that connection was everything.
He even looked back on his own stuff and had this incredible realization. He said that his worst writing, the lifeless books, the fancy sentences that meant nothing, all the humbug, it always happened when his political purpose was fuzzy or non-existent. For him, having a clear purpose wasn't just a political thing. It was the secret to good writing. And that brings us to maybe the most famous thing he ever said about writing. That one line, that's his whole mission in a nutshell. The whole point of writing, just like the point of his revolution, was to wipe away all the muck, all the lies, all the BS, so that people could just see things clearly. And that really leaves us with a question for our own time, doesn't it? Orwell spent his life trying to make these window panes to shine a light on the deceptions of his day. So what about us? What about right now? In a world just swimming in what he called pure wind, what are the lies, the injustices, the crucial truths that desperately need a clean window pane today?